The other day, my wife needed to give me a haircut. So I was in the bathroom getting ready for my haircut, and I looked in the mirror and I turned around and I saw, and I'm like, oh my word, when did my dad get in the room? I had that moment where I recognized how much I had my looks as I've aged. I started to look more and more like my father. It's interesting, the passage we're going to look at today, it's going to ask us to start looking more and more like someone in the long run. So I want us to think about that. In Mark chapter 12, Jesus is in the last week of his life, and he has this conversation with a scribe where one of the scribes come up after hearing him argue with a group of people, and the scribe asks Jesus, "What is the most important commandment?" And Jesus responds with the following words. He says, "This is the most important. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." And the scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and there is no other besides him. And to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." This is known as the Great Commandment, and that Jesus is interesting in the midst of this conversation with this scribe who asks him about these commandments, and he agrees on this is the greatest commandment, to love God and to love neighbor. Now, the scribe would have been very intimately acquainted with the laws of the Bible, the Old Testament alone, that the scribes said that there were 613 laws included in the Old Testament. And so that this debate about which of the 613 laws was the most important was not necessarily a new question that the scribe was providing to Jesus, but that he was interested in Jesus' answer because the answer provides where Jesus places weight, where Jesus understands the most important thing about who God is and what it means to live for him would have been answered by this question. As we think about obedience to a bunch of rules, we think about obedience to rules, that we can be obedient to the rules and not necessarily really obey the intention of the rule, or that our motivation for following that rule can be wrong. Give you an example, we can obey the speed limit, but that we can obey the speed limit for the purpose of simply not getting a speeding ticket, that we obey the law for the purpose of not being punished for breaking it. Or another one, we have sons, and sometimes my wife and I look at each other and go, wow, so-and-so, this son is just, it's incredible how much he's cleaning the house today and just taking care of things. And then come to find out that he's really thinking that he can ask us to go for ice cream later, and that if he keeps everything clean and does all of that work and is obedient to our requests in the house during the day, that he can get what he wants. You see, he obeys because he thinks that he's going to obtain something that he desires at the end of it. I really believe that these two motivations are significant reasons why we obey the laws or the rules that are given to us. I think we can do that even to God's rules, is that we say we want to obey God so we can avoid hell, for example, so we avoid the punishment. Or the other say we're going to obey God so that we can obtain what we want. We want to obtain heaven. And that we might not talk that way, but we will throw it in situations like, oh, I better have a relationship with Jesus so that way I can avoid hell or obtain heaven, because that's what I really want. I really want to avoid the punishment, or I want to obtain some good thing that I'm supposed to get, that I want to get. What Jesus seems to press upon us, not just in here, but throughout all of his teaching, is that the correct motivation for being obedient to the law of God is love. And that's what this most important commandment is all about, is that this most important commandment is saying that everything that we do needs to be done out of this motivation to love one another. And that love is not self-seeking. It's not, I'm going to clean the house and be obedient to my parents so I can get ice cream, or I'm not going to break the speed limit so that I don't get a speeding ticket. But that love says, I'm going to follow through on that which I'm commanded to do. I'm going to be obedient to that because it benefits someone else. So, for example, I can follow the speed limit, not because I want to avoid the punishment of a speeding ticket, but because we know that the speeding limits have been established for the purpose of keeping others safe. That I obey the speed limit because I know that other people on the road are going to be safer, or going to be healthier, or going to be aware, or not going to get into an accident if I obey the speed limit. That's the purpose for the speed limits. That's the intention behind obeying the speed limit that is appropriate and loving. Or caring for the home is meant to be a loving response by my children, and thinking about the benefit of others because they don't live here alone. That there's others that share the house with them that need to live in this environment. That this is a gift that God has given us, this home that we've given. And so the benefit to others is that we care for that which God has given us in this home and in this space so that it can be shared well with others. I would strongly encourage you to be thinking through why you are obedient to who you are obedient to. What are the commands that you're willing to be obedient to? And what are those things that you say, you know what, that's really not that important to be obedient to? And why are you doing that? Take the time to honestly ask the question, why? Get to your motivation for being obedient. And that if you're willing to do that work of looking at your motivation, something incredible is going to happen, because Jesus tells us, and the Bible tells us as well, that elsewhere, that God is in fact love. And so if you're willing to do that motivation and start to obey out of that correct place of love by the power of God's Holy Spirit residing in you, that someday you're going to take a look in the mirror and you're going to go, wow, when did Jesus get here? When did I start looking like my Father in heaven? And you'll be surprised by how that pure and self-giving love changes who you are from the inside out and lets others around you see the goodness and the love of God. Because they matter. Because each decision you make matters. So I encourage you to do that today.